space. If that first number goes well, the whole concert will go well, because then we'll know we're cooking, right? So, себе, please. 2, 3. Good, great. Very good concert. I was born of Russian parents in Latvia. My father was born there too when Latvia was still part of Russia. My mother came from St. Petersburg. We lived with my mother's parents. That was a very gifted family, painters and dancers, prima ballerina. And so there was a lot of singing at home. It was a very vibrant atmosphere. We left Latvia, my family split because one part of the family did not want to get into German-occupied territories, and my father couldn't stay in the Soviet-occupied territories because he was in the so-called White Army when he was a kid, and his 2 brothers were killed in that thing. So he couldn't stay, so our family split, and we landed in German-occupied Poland, where I spent most of the war. In January 45, when the Soviet troops were approaching the city where we lived in Western Poland, Poznań, my mother and I walked practically through Western Poland, through Germany, and landed in Austria, in Salzburg.
Displaced persons camps were set up to house the millions of refugees that ended up in Allied-controlled areas at the end of the war. Most of the refugees were returned to their countries of origin. In many cases, people went back willingly. In many other cases, people were forcibly repatriated. But about 1.5 million displaced persons were ultimately allowed to emigrate elsewhere, about 600,000 of them to the United States.
And there I eventually finished my high school and went to study at the Mozarteum, in the music school in Salzburg. The Americans came and liberated or occupied Salzburg. There I played in American GI clubs and officers' clubs, and so made my living playing jazz. And it took several years to acquire a visa to come to the United States.
The Russian club was like most language clubs in those days. We met once a week and we discussed history of a particular country, literature, music. We were a group maybe of 15, tops 20 guys, most of whom were students of Russian or Russian area studies. We were kind of oddballs. McCarthy was riding high. Yale was very white shoe, fraternities, jocks, the secret societies, and here were a group of guys who had an interest, a common interest in things Russian.
We as a group had a huge interest in Russia, with no capacity really to satisfy that curiosity in a direct way.
Теперь нет снега.
We had a terrific faculty advisor. He was no youngster in those days, a chap named Alexander Nikolaevich Vasilyev. And one day, Vasilyev comes to me and says, "Georgi, this Russian club, it's okay. A little dull," he says. "You know, discussing music is okay, but that's not the way to do it." He says, I introduce you to a friend of mine from the Yale School of Music. In fact, this friend was Denis Mickiewicz. So we invited Mickiewicz to come and address the Russian club on choral music of Russia. Mickiewicz was a very smart fellow. He decided that the best way to introduce himself to the Russian chorus was to arrive 2 bottles of vodka under his arms, a guitar, and some mimeographed arrangements of some very basic Russian folk songs. Quite honestly, we were quite devoid of talent, particularly me. The other guys, you know, didn't have totally tin ears. But Mickiewicz started strumming his guitar, and he had a passion for what he was doing. And amazingly, this group of folks who really had no musical abilities started singing this repertoire.
Students were so cosmopolitan. For example, John Francis, he was then president of the German club. George Litton was fluent in French. I realized that from mere curiosity about the songs, they might be able to identify with these songs. And that is rare, because usually artists identify, but these people were young intellectuals, and they were curious about everything, including songs.
Denis was a master of finding the grand and the profound in the apparently rude and simple. Songs like Kalinka, Paiduli, and Vakuznice are a whole art form in themselves when you understand them right.
Such a fixed idea, so repetitious, so gloomy. The rhythm is bouncy. And it is typical Russian manic depressive. The motif depressive, harmony depressive, but the rhythm is manic and also infectious. And then ultimately that rhythm wins out. Even very modest chorus at the beginning had always great success with the people. They always had standing ovations. So even when they couldn't sing well, they would communicate the song better than they could sing it. I had the fortune of or misfortune to sit in a camp behind barbed wires with Cossacks. And then I noticed that they sing almost as if it is the last thing they're doing. We sang 2 Cossack songs, one in Ukrainian and one in Russian. The accent on that second wheel will sound, I think, more virile if we do it a little faster. Now let's do it pianissimo. 3 and 3 and. That is not pianissimo. At the climax of the battle, there's almost a euphoria of the terrible things that happen. Heads roll, people swim in blood. Feeling that comes across may be akin to the feeling of people who know that if they stick their head out, they might get chopped, and yet they do it. These guys are generous. They're generous with their efforts, they're generous with their time. And I think, convince them that expressivity is more important than beauty. And they don't have to worry about their precious voice. If it cracks, so be it. In a critical song, it's part of the ethos.